Alright, so a couple weeks back Etheria Restart launched, which is a game developed by XT Incorporated, who've also made games like Ooh La La, Sword of Convalaria, and Sausage Man. Since it launched, I've been playing pretty much daily as a casual player, and I wanted to give some thoughts on how the game is going and how it feels from that perspective. So here we go. For those of you that may not be familiar with Etheria Restart, I'll give a brief overview. It's a turn-based game sort of similar to HSR, but honestly, it's more similar to traditional turn-based games that have depth in terms of a variety of skills available, and it also has something entirely separate from HSR, which is PvP. Really, it's more of a game similar to Epic 7, and it definitely took a lot of notes from that game in its design for better or for worse, which I'll get into later. Outside of the actual gameplay, it's also got a story with 10 chapters that you can fully complete around the time your account hits level 30, or in other words 6 to 8 days or so of daily play without refreshing any stamina. While I wouldn't consider the story particularly good, I would say that it's got at least some potential with what they've set up. It just needs to be something that they continue to iterate on as the game progresses. I think if they let it fall by the wayside in favor of focusing solely on PvP content, then they could definitely lose the market of players that enjoy that kind of thing, but realistically, you should know what you're getting into when you sign up for playing a PvP gacha game. If reading story isn't your thing, then there actually is a skip button, but at the very least I'd say their cutscenes are worth a watch as they get progressively better as you go through the story. Chapter 10s in particular are pretty nice, though obviously that's quite a small sample size. Anyway, as I mentioned earlier, I've been mostly playing this game as a casual player. In the rush of the early game, it's actually heavily recommended that new players refresh their stamina so that they can grind more materials and gear, generally with the idea of getting towards the meat of the game, which is farming for all the gear you need for PvP and competing in the multiple modes that they have for it. For me though, I decided against doing refreshes because at the end of the day, the only thing that kind of rush accomplishes is getting through the content the game has quicker, and I have no problem getting to where everyone else is at a slower pace. Like, just because PvP is a huge part of the game doesn't necessarily mean I should speedrun everything else like the PvE to get to it, and in fact I've actually had more fun with that rather than the PvP part. That's not to say that PvP isn't fun, I have actually enjoyed it when I played it, but figuring out the quote-unquote puzzle of the different PvE stages is actually where the majority of the fun has been in the game for me, at least for now. For example, there's been a mode called Ember Trek that doesn't cost any stamina or anything like that, where you go through a few stages fighting trash mobs and eventually end up fighting a boss. I was actually able to push beyond what my account realistically should have been able to clear by creating a team composition almost entirely focused on sustaining while doing a little bit of chip damage along the way to slowly kill the enemy. There wasn't a time limit, there was no bring this character or you lose, it was just think of a cool strategy and then execute it. At least for me, this was actually really refreshing to see because it's a mode unlike what you see in most other gachas nowadays that give you a time limit and then basically say good luck. The other PvE modes were pretty fun too, like Anti-Sync Echoes that basically acts as a means of testing your roster against a variety of bosses, Phantom Theater which actually offers co-op content you can do with friends, and on top of that, a guild system that is raised called Anchor Recon where all of your guildmates work together to defeat a few big bosses over the course of a week. This is all stuff that I've wanted for years in games like HSR or even Genshin, because not only is it a means of doing stuff with other people, which those aforementioned games severely lack, but best of all, it's all repeatable content without any kind of stamina cost. I've actually found it pretty fun to go back and repeat PvE content like this just to see if I can clear it a different way, or without doing different sustain strats, or with entirely different units. And it's also been a lot of fun doing that with friends too. I will say some of this stuff will probably lose its luster once the honeymoon phase of the game is over, but stuff like guild raids and whatnot are something I can see remaining fun as long as the bosses get updates over time to be more interesting. With all that said, let's move on to the PvP aspect. This has honestly been something that's pretty hit or miss for me, so I want to talk about why. In Etheria Restart, PvP is currently split into 3 main modes. There's the Ether Arena, which has you fighting AI lineups of characters that were set up by other players, the Summit Arena, where you fight other players in real time with each of you controlling your own team and a draft system to pick your units, and the Fearless Arena, which is basically the same thing as the Summit Arena but in a tournament format. All 3 of these modes have ranks attached to them, with the Ether and Summit arenas having brackets you have to climb through similar to what you'd find in other competitive games like Bronze, Silver, Gold, and so on, and the Fearless Arena's ranks are just attached to total wins of tournaments. There are a decent chunk of rewards attached to these modes, but you can also get a good portion of them just by participating. I'm a pretty competitive guy, so stuff like this is actually really appealing to me, and I think long term, I could see myself getting really invested into this. But remember, I've been playing casually. So, as a result, the PvP has felt really awkward. One game, I might run into someone that's done a lot of refreshing and is at a gear level much higher than mine, and the next I might find someone that's been playing just like I have and we might have similar gear. This results in a decent amount of the games feeling like a complete coin toss because, obviously, I can't really hit the same damage numbers or reach the same speed levels as someone 15 account levels above me can reach. This isn't inherently a bad thing though, because it essentially acts as a filter where until my account gets to the level of those other players, I'll have to keep fighting people that are supposed to be at my account's level, though obviously that doesn't take into account players that just haven't started PvP yet. All that said, when I do get a balanced matchup, the PvP is actually pretty fun, particularly in the summit arena with a draft mode. I like the idea of being able to outsmart my opponent even as early as the draft phase, and actually being able to go back and forth with someone in real time is pretty neat too. As I said, long term, I see this being really fun, but short term, it's definitely a bit frustrating dealing with all the randomness. This is a decent point to segue into some of the other things I wanted to talk about here. One of the more frustrating aspects of this game to me is that there's really not a whole lot of guidance given to the player. It almost feels like you're expected to know how this kind of game works prior to going in, and I don't just mean in terms of the gameplay itself, but also gearing and stuff like that. Like the tons upon tons of different gear sets, the different stats and thresholds you need to meet for content, knowing how to identify the specific things you need for each boss or game mode that you're playing through. At least for me, it didn't feel like much of this stuff was really explained, and that can definitely be overwhelming for someone new to this style of gacha game. In a vacuum, being overwhelmed because you have a lot to learn isn't necessarily a bad thing. Like, learning is exciting, and it's not something that's mutually exclusive from feeling the pressure of learning a lot of new things at once. But here, there's a few things that make it go from just overwhelming to frustrating, which does lessen the experience overall in my eyes. For one, resources are very scarce. If you're someone that wants to just try out different compositions of characters, you're going to be struggling to fully do it in the short term. There's not enough XP to go around, there's not enough skill materials, you're gonna run out of coins that you need to level your gear, and there's a whole bunch of other bottlenecks that feel annoying as a player. And again, full transparency, I do realize that they want you to refresh your stamina so that you can progress your account faster, and also just so you have stamina to actually play the game, but it does feel weird that without doing so, my free stamina dried up pretty quickly. Like, it wasn't more than a few days after the launch of the game that level ups became less frequent, and as a result, I was only able to use this stamina that recharges over time if I didn't want to actually refresh. While this isn't a one-to-one comparison as the game is much older and therefore generally more generous, I played a bit of Epic 7 about a year ago, and for the duration of my time playing that game, there was never once a point where I felt that I was even close to running out of stamina. It felt like a game where I could grind as much as I wanted to get as much gear and materials as I needed without feeling like I was forced to stop at certain points. I do get that Etheria is new, which is why it's not a one-to-one comparison, but I feel this launch period of the game is when you should want your players to be able to play a ton. Sure, there are those other non-stamina based modes that I mentioned earlier, but even those modes are technically directly related to stamina in some sense, because you have to have decently built characters to clear the higher level stages and the more difficult enemies that come with them. I don't know if I'm just used to the more modern gacha games at this point, but in games like Wuwa or Genshin, it feels like there's a lot of stuff that you can do separate from things that are related to stamina, but apart from PvP, this game feels like it's lacking that for someone that's either only interested in the PvE aspects of the game, or someone like me who just doesn't have an account that's ready for the PvP stuff yet. Even if we ignore stamina though, there's other resources that can heavily gate your progress as well, mostly in the skill material department. See, in this game, you can only invest in your skills up to a certain point, and then when you get there, you have to spend a rare currency called lattices to actually level the skill up and get a new effect on it. On top of that, each skill has 5 levels. These lattices are further split into 3 rarities for 3, 4, and 5-star units respectively, and in the entirety of my time playing the game, I've only gotten 8 of the 5-star materials and 17 of the 4-star ones. When the next week starts, I can buy 1 more 5-star lattice, bringing my total up to 9, but even then, that's not enough to even level 2 skills of a 5-star character to max. And I will say, I'm sure you don't actually need to max skills or anything like that, and I know for a fact that there are some more of these sold in different packs in the store for real money, but it definitely feels super limiting. Also, due to what I mentioned earlier with not really being given much guidance as a player, I can see it becoming very easy to essentially brick your account if you choose to invest in the wrong thing. With all that said, all in all, most of these things that I have issues with are relatively minor in the grand scheme of things. Right, like with time, I know that I'll understand the game more, and with time, I'll eventually get an account built up that's actually able to compete in PvP, and with time, hopefully there will be new sources of resources that don't require stamina to get, or at the very least, I'll end up with a surplus of resources as my account progresses. But the larger issues the game will have, in my opinion, is the lack of things to do that don't require resources apart from the PvP aspects, and on top of that, one last thing I didn't mention so far is the company making the game. There's been some stuff with the game that's come up since launch, which I'll briefly go over. For one, they are suspected of using AI for character splash arts. I'm not going to touch on my opinion about that here, but they did get some small heat for it, and you can find out more about it in this video, which I'll link down in the description. Apart from that, there were a few changes to the game post-launch that messed with the overall balance. For example, they made a boss that used to be able to take dot damage immune to it, and another enemy used to have a strippable buff immune to that as well. These changes weren't really well documented in any kind of patch note and were instead listed as bug fixes. This got people fairly upset due to them investing in characters or strategies to beat these enemies, and that was essentially taken away from them. As a result, their investment in those characters was definitely less impactful, and that's not really a good feeling to have as a player. While they have made amends recently by offering a bit of compensation as well as the ability to reset all the resources that you invested in one character for free, it is something that's been a relatively hot topic in the game, so go into it with a grain of salt. Really, I feel that what will make or break this game will be how the company handles it. They've got the bones of a good game here. I mean, hell, the entire first section of this video is me talking about the good parts of the game like PvE and how excited I was to eventually get into PvP. But with the lack of resources early on, the heavy incentive to refresh so you can actually play the game, the mess-ups that I just mentioned, and the fierce competition in the gacha space in this niche, only time will tell how this game goes in the long term. In the meantime, I'm going to continue to play the game at least until either I get bored or the game goes downhill. In terms of recommending the game, I'd say it's currently about a 6 to a 7 on my personal enjoyment scale, so I think it's worth a shot at the very least if this style of game interests you. But to give a final warning, again, there's definitely a large focus on PvP, so remember to keep that in mind and know what you're getting into before you start playing the game. Anyway, that's all my thoughts, and I appreciate you listening if you made it this far. I'd love to hear what you think about the game, whether you play it or not, so feel free to join my Discord link in the description to talk with me about it. As always, thank you so much for watching, subscribe, and if you haven't already, maybe give one of the videos a shot too.